Bill Carroll, Zenny62 Media, and I'm going to be very, very honest. I try not to have favorites, but this is probably my favorite group of players in terms of the draft class, and that's the defensive tackle group. It is a rare and special group, and when I think about the number of players that I have in my personal top 150 from this group, there's I think 8 players in my personal 150 just from this position group itself. I'm going to work my way through those players and, of course, spend a little bit of time, at least a little bit of time, on why I think they have a chance to be successful, long-term successful NFL players. And one of the tackles that I think, like I said, it truly has a chance to have a long, successful career was taken at pick 16, and that's Walter Nolan. And if you sort of asked people 2 years ago, right, who would be the number one defensive tackle of the guys who were in that college football class that he came in, who'd be the one off the board first, I think most, maybe not everybody, but most people would have said, oh, it's going to be Walter Nolan, right? Walter Nolan is simply a potentially special player, and people knew that, frankly, fairly early on about him. But I'll start at the begin at the beginning. Mason Graham was first off the board and of the defensive tackles, and everyone sort of anticipated that. I have Nolan ahead of Grant, which is the second tackle, also the Michigan player who, of course, played right next to Mason Graham. Mason Graham is the more talented and disruptive. Grant is the more traditional 0 or 1 tech, the run plugger, the I won't say Vince Wilfork because that's a little too much. More like maybe Corey Peters kind of player, which is still a good player. Like Corey Peters is a guy that had a terrific NFL career. So if he ends up being that good, I think that should be considered, I think it's a decent comparison. I think it should be considered a what do you call it? A compliment, right? Because Corey Peters played in the league for over a decade and was good that entire time, right? A guy that was in the league for what? 13 years. 13 years. And recently has started his career as an NFL scout. So, congratulations and good luck to you, Corey Peters, working in scouting. But that's a guy that had 336 total tackles in his career, 19 sacks from that position, forced 1 fumble, recovered 3, had 1 interception, and scored a touchdown. In fact, frankly, I'm probably shooting too high. I think Grant may not quite get to that level. But this guy went 83rd overall in Peters. But that's why I think it's a ceiling for a guy like Grant. But getting back to the career, the shape of the career I believe that we're talking about. Then we come to Walter Nolan. Like I said, I think Walter Nolan, it's hard to call a guy at 16th overall a steal, right? He's not a steal exactly at 16th overall. But I think that he may end up performing at a very high standard for a very long time. And then you have Derek Harmon. These are 2 really good players. And then Tyleik Williams is a good player. I think he may be slightly overdrafted just a little bit, but I'll get to him in a moment. Walter Nolan, if you hear questions about his drive or love for football or hustle or whatever it is, I don't know. I mean, throw on the tape, I guess is what people always go back to. Now, Walter Nolan's career recently, obviously concludes at Ole Miss. I think he was good at Ole Miss. You could argue he was better prior to that, maybe, in his days with the Aggies. The Aggies have, once again, I won't belabor the thing I've said about the Aggies and defensive linemen. But Walter Nolan's a good football player. He's going to be a very good football player for a very long time. And I won't be surprised if he ends up being the best of the group. But not far back in my rankings and in my esteem is Derek Harmon. Now, Harmon is a slightly different kind of player from really most of the other guys in this group in that there are people who really think he should be playing at least somewhere away from the interior of the line. He's a legit, really potentially special athlete with length, right? 34 and 3/8 inch arms, a 4.95 40 at 6'4.5", 313 pounds. The theory is that if this guy drops 20 pounds, he's going to run in the 4.8s. I don't know if that's really wise. I think that he should just basically follow Cameron Hayward around like a lost puppy and do everything he does and be a great defensive tackle who occasionally kicks outside. Now, Tyleik Williams. Once again, I do not dislike the player. I do not dislike the selection. Do I think they could have selected somebody who would give them more immediate impact at that pick? Yes. But I also know that the Lions don't care. The Lions have a board that is separate and distinct from everyone else's. Definitely separate and distinct from mine. But once again, you have a good athlete in a guy like Williams. Not a freak athlete, but a good athlete, right? And big enough, right? I mean, more than big enough. He's going to eat space up on the interior. He gives you some push as a guy who sort of, presses into the pocket. His ceiling, maybe Akeem Hicks. I don't think he ever gets to that level. I don't think he's quite there. But he ends up being a good player, I'm pretty sure. TJ Sanders. Hey, when you're the Bills, roll the dice. Sanders is another guy that could end up really outperforming where he's been selected. There's things to like about him. He has some inconsistencies on tape, quite frankly. But he's been productive for virtually all of his career. Another guy who's got above average length with 33 and an 1/8 arms, big old hands at 10 1/4, barely sub 5, but under sub 5 in the 40, 4.99. And when I think about what he could be, sort of the upside, I think about some of those sort of tweener types. And obviously Nick Fairley didn't really work out. But I think he has some things in common with Nick Fairley. I think he's going to have a better career than Nick Fairley, who wasn't terrible, just wasn't as good as people thought he might be. And then now we come to Alfred Collins. Another one of those roll the dice kind of situations. Because Collins ended up being the second or third best tackle in this class. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying it's possible. The talent is certainly there. I like a lot of things about Alfred Collins. But I definitely wish he had been more consistent throughout his collegiate career. You could see Alfred Collins go out and have a pretty much, dominant game, even a dominant couple of games, and then disappear in the next game. Once again, what do you love about him? Length, 34 and 5/8. I'm going to say it one more time. 34 and 5/8 inch arms, 6'5 and 5/8, 332 pounds. Now, I don't love the 26 inch vertical. Now, he's, a 330 plus pound man, so that's not terrible. But he's not super explosive, right? He's not super explosive. And that 8-foot broad jump, once again, you're not expecting a 10-foot broad jump out of a man that size, or even a 9-foot. But you're expecting probably more like 8'8", 8'7", 8'6". So I'm a little, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But worst case scenario, you're getting a guy that, once again, sort of mucks it up, gums it up on the interior. Maybe he becomes a Linval Joseph type. If so, congratulations. That you're going to collect game checks for a long time if you become that. Then we come to Shamar Turner. The run on Shamar's. Shamar Turner, yet another Texas A&M defensive lineman at pick 62 to the Bears. And he'll see the field, right? Another one of those tweener-ish kinds of players. 6'3.5", or 6'3 1/8", 290. Probably will play in the low 300s. Length again, right? 33 and 5/8 inch arms. You like that. I don't always love the tape. Once again, a guy that if we show you the right 3 games, that's a top, that's a top 40, top 30, maybe even pick. Look at the right 3 games. Look at the wrong 3 games. His worst 3 games, you're thinking this guy's a 5th rounder. So I guess we split the difference. He goes to pick 62. Then we come to Omar Norman Lott. Now, if you want for pure, the guy may end up leading this group in tackles for loss and sacks as a rookie. It might be one Omar Norman Lott. Now, you may not want to play him on first down a lot. He is a guy that is capable of being good against the run, but clearly prioritizes playing the pass. He sort of plays, as they say, the run on the way to the quarterback. But super disruptive player. Has the potential, that dangerous word, but has the potential to be great. And at pick 63, the risk is limited. It's limited risk. I will not be surprised if he has 5.5 sacks, even as a part-time player on the interior. He's that kind of pass rusher. And then we come to My personal favorite. Now, I try not to have favorites, but I couldn't help myself when it came to Darius Alexander. He ended up becoming my personal favorite D tackle in the class. One, versatility, right? You could ask him to play defensive end, which he might end up doing, in fact. But he's played tackle. He's played a little bit of end. He's 6'3" and 7'8", so almost 6'4", 305 pounds, 34. Once again, length, 34-inch arms, 4.95 in the 40. So they're hoping to find another Leonard Williams, I believe, and they may have found one to some extent. Other people he's a little bit like, right? Michael Bennett, right? Move around piece. Just a good athlete, right? 31.5-inch vertical, 9'3". That's what I like, right? Over 9 feet when you're over 300 pounds. Over 9 feet broad, when you're over 300 pounds, that tells you about lower body power. And then he had 28 reps, tells you about upper body power because he has 34-inch arms. If you had 32-inch arms, that's still sort of impressive, but 34-inch arms, long and strong. A lot to like. My personal favorite, I was hoping we would get him somewhere, we don't have, we gave up, obviously, our, a draft pick to get DK Metcalf, so we would have probably taken him in the second. But I like this player. Vernon Broughton, another solid player, another Texas D lineman. And once again, there's good tape, and then there's meh tape. I wouldn't go start saying bad tape on Broughton, but there's definitely some tape that gives you pause. Another big-bodied guy. This is a really big, interesting group. And long, 35, right? 35 inches. That's ridiculous arm length. 6'5", 311. If Vernon Broughton is nothing more than a situational, just a take up space kind of guy, you don't feel terrible about getting him at this point. I think he has the potential to be more, and there's, like I said, some legitimate interest in him, like what he could be, his upside, and all that kind of stuff. I do really want to see him used correctly, and that means probably playing maybe a little bit of 5-tech at times. Now, I want to make clear, he's not Chris Jones. He's not that kind of player. He's not, Fletcher Cox. But he could be sort of a, like I said, not Cam Hayward either, but sort of a poor man's. I mean, I could see him being Linval Joseph, but and that would be sort of on the high side. On the low side, he's there's a Michigan player I'm picking up, not Mozzie Smith. There's another one I'm thinking of who was like sort of a gummit up in the middle guy. But I'm going to move on to Jamaria Caldwell. Jamaria Caldwell is going to a really good situation. One is the Chargers need an infusion of young talent on the interior of their defense, and while he's probably going to be mostly that sort of muck it up in the middle run plugger, solid career at Houston, then finishes off at Oregon, had 29 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 pass deflections, forced a fumble. I don't think he's ever going to be a special pass rusher from the interior because that's not really what he's going to be ever asked to do. But I really think he could, worst case scenario, be that guy that just sits over sits on that gap between the guard and the center and holds the point. But if you do give him chances just to sort of go one-on-one with the center, and he has shown a little bit of like ability to throw some swim and some arm over kind of moves. And then we're going to come to the next prospect, sort of a divisive, in my mind, divisive prospect in Deion Walker at pick 109 going to the Bills. Now, once again, the Bills need to get younger and on that defense, and they need to get cheaper. Most importantly, cheaper on that defense. They've got some cap stuff, but look at this just enormous giant of a human being. 6'7" and 3/8", right? 6'7" and 3/8 is, we're talking John Henderson, we're talking Art Still, it's not quite Doug Atkins-ish. Like, it's a short list of great players who've been that tall. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages you get to that 6'7" and up area. Pad level is the big challenge. The good news, obviously, is that all that, ability to just take up area, bat down, pass 6'3", 34.25-inch arms, 10 5/8. I have normal hands. It's 1.5 of my hands, right? At 10 5/8-inch hands. The 5'3", 640 on a guy that size is actually not awful. The 25-inch vertical on a guy that size is not awful. The 8'8" broad on a guy that size is actually really good, right? We talked about somebody coming in like 8 flat. Like 8'8", not terrible at all for a guy that size. 22 bench reps for a guy with long arms. I'd like a couple more reps on a guy that size, but I don't hate it. And what could Deion Walker be if everything goes perfectly? That's a great question, right? It's a fantastic question. I'll be interested to see exactly how it pans out for him. There's hard to come up with a lot of comparisons for a guy like him. There haven't been that many players that size. If everything goes perfectly, I mean, could he be Roger Brown? No, right? Look up Roger Brown if you don't know who Roger Brown is. He was the first great 300-plus pound player in the history of the league, really. And, he came in just as pass rushing became a big thing for defensive linemen, particularly interior defensive linemen. He was one of the best. And he was, 300-plus pounds, 6'5", and could really move, right? He ran a 10 flat 100-yard dash when he was a sprinter. Yeah, he was a sprinter in college. But back to Deion Walker. I don't like Walker as much as some people do. Some people had him late second. A lot of people have him in the third. He goes in the fourth, which makes a little more sense. I would have taken him even slightly later. But I think he has a chance to be a good situational player. I don't think he ever becomes a full-time starter. Maybe I'm wrong. In fact, I'd love to be wrong. Moving on. The next of the selections at this very, very talent-rich position, and once again, a player I think has a chance to really make an impact. Even if it's as a part-time-ish player, is Ty Robinson, who I think eventually, when we think about the Adam characters, we think about the big-bodied sort of D-tackle / DN tweener types. Now, he goes to the Eagles, who I believe will consider him an end. His nickname is quite literally the Vanilla Gorilla, which, how do you not love that? And finds his way to Nebraska, checks in at legitimately 6'5" and 1/8", 288 pounds. So, I brought up character, sloppy, easy comparison because of Nebraska, but I think that's the kind of player he could be. Ran a 4.83, which at 6'5" and 1/8", 288 is actually a good number. 33.5-inch vertical, really good number. 9'11", almost a 10-foot broad at that size is actually crazy. 28 reps on the bench. Now, that's one knock, is sort of shorter arms. 32 1/4, that's actually slightly less than mine, and I'm, 5'7" and 5'8", so I have unusually long arms for my height. But still, all of the numbers, his production numbers, and all of his numbers except his arm length are above the 50th, in fact, above the 60th percentile. So he's a guy that's 60-plus percentile in everything that you can look up, or historically, except arm length, at his position. Moving on. But once again, I like the pick. He goes to the Eagles, which is a great place for him to go, and he's going to see the field. Then we come to the 49ers. The 49ers have a type, my friends. They like big people. They really do. And while C.J. West isn't particularly tall, he's a big person. He came in at 360 in the combine. He's going to play 10 to 15 pounds heavier than that, my guess is. Arm length isn't great, 31.5, but it's not terrible. 4.95 is actually getting it for a guy his size. And a 33-inch vertical for a guy built like him, that's, once again, flat getting it. 28 reps on the bench, not crazy great for a guy with 31.5-inch arms who's 316 pounds, but all the other numbers are really, really good. And he's, like I said, he'll be a classic sort of run plugger. First discovered him, right? I was looking at, what's his name, the quarterback, went to Michigan, J.J. McCarthy. And this guy's right there, right? West is another guy who's out there in LaGrange Park, Illinois, west suburbs. And he really goes to Kent State, goes there, then transfers and kills it in his time at Indiana. 2 sacks, which is, considering he's a true nose, is not bad, but 42 tackles is really good production for a guy who's playing right on the nose. And then that brings us to some more sort of play around, move around tweener types. So when you look at both of these guys, both Farmer, who goes to the Las Vegas Raiders, who goes to the Patriots, and Tonka Hemingway went to the Raiders. So I'll start with Tonka Hemingway. South Carolina had a lot of really interesting athletes on their team. And not all of them quite gave what you wanted to see on tape consistently. Now, Hemingway is 6'3" and 284. So he's never going to be a full-time tackle at the NFL level. Well, let me rephrase that. I mean, we just saw the career of one Aaron Charles Donald, who played at between 266 and 282 pounds much of his NFL career. So let me not say he can't do it, but he's not Aaron Charles Donald. He's not superhero strong. So that's the first thing that I want to mention. He's not as fast also. I mean, Donald ran what would have been a good time for a linebacker, but he ran a 5.01, which at 284 is not terrible, but it's not great. I think of guys like Turk McBride when I think about him, or like some of those other sort of tweener types. His ceiling, if everything goes perfectly, is maybe like Epinesa-esque, but I don't think he quite gets to that. I don't know if he ends up, like I said, being a... You have to figure out what he is, right? Is he a tackle? Is he an end? If he's a tackle, you probably want him to get a little heavier. If he's a defensive end, you probably want him to get a little faster. But 33-inch arms, which is about average for a 6'2 and 7/8 guy. And his other numbers are all solid, but not incredible. 32-inch vertical, 9'4 broad. These are all solid numbers. But I just wonder, and once again, where he's picked is not a bad place to get him. I just think he's a rotational player. And then the other, and this could be the slightly better player, the next one at just 2 picks later, 137, is Joshua Farmer. And Farmer is another player that, once again, you look at his measurables, you think, wow. 5'11", in the 40s, not terrible for a 305 pounder. It's okay. But here's the number, the eye popper, right? 35-inch arm length, right? That's an eye popper. 26 reps with 35-inch arms is actually quite impressive. And 9'4 broad for a 305-pound man, that's actually really good. 29-inch vertical, solid. Not incredible, but solid. So he's got some explosion. He's got tremendous length. He's got decent strength. And in his last season, he had 32 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. Like 32 tackles is, not crazy, but it's okay. The 7 tackles for loss is very impressive. Had 5 sacks. That's super impressive for a guy who plays on the interior. And a couple pass deflections. So we'll see exactly what happens with his career. But I'll always sort of think about Hemingway and Farmer. I liked Farmer slightly better on tape than Hemingway. But they go 2 picks apart. Next we come to Cam Jackson. And Cam Jackson is, another one of those. Florida underachieved as a program the last couple of years. I think it'd be fair to say that. I think Florida fans would back me up on that. He starts his career, before he gets there, obviously, at Memphis. And he's tremendous at Memphis, right? While he's there, his last year there, 41 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack, was 3rd team all-conference. You could see the upside and the potential. You could see why teams were excited. 6'6" and a quarter, 328. Another absolute giant. This tackle class has so many huge human beings. 34 and an 8-inch arms, which is really impressive. 5'17", 40, which for a guy that size is actually pretty decent. The vertical, 24 and a half, even for a guy that size, is a little less. 27 is what I'm looking for. 27 and a half would be great. 26 isn't bad. 24 and a half scares me a little. And the 7'9" broad, right? I'd like them to be a little over 8 feet. If it's an 8'3" broad and a 26 and a half inch vertical. So it tells me he doesn't have a tremendously strong lower body, right? Despite the fact that he's a very big guy. And that worries me just a little. But he's picked 140. Not a huge investment. And once again, worst case scenario is a rotational guy that sort of just takes up a lot of space. Then we come to Riley Mills. Riley Mills is the guy that struggled a little bit with being nicked up at times. But when you watch him on tape, another guy I got to watch in high school because he's from the north suburbs here. He's from Lake Forest High School. Was a shot and discus man also in high school before he makes his way to Notre Dame. Had a nice career. Not incredible, right? But a nice career. A little slender-ish, 291 on a 6'5", 3/8" frame, but not quite athletic enough that you would consider him maybe a 5-tech projection, unless you just want your 5-techs to just take up space, right? When I think of the Kemal von Olhoffens of the world and things like that, I think he's not quite that, right? But there's things to like about him. Once again, a guy you'll never have to worry about effort. A guy you'll never have to worry about, him, what he does, what he'll give you. I'm a little concerned about certain parts of him. as what he could be. Could play, like I said, some 5 tech, but I just look at, and once again, we mentioned Adam Carricker. I think he's not quite that, but there's things if you break him down, could I see him eventually becoming a player that plays 30-something to 40% of the snaps? That could happen, right? He was down to 296 by the pro days. He was going lighter rather than heavier. Did not give you any, a full testing day, but 32 3/4 inch arms at the pro day. So I just worry a little bit, right? I just worry a little bit about what he's exactly going to be, what you can expect, right? That's my only real sort of question mark. I do think he'll give you everything he has, right? That I do believe. And like I said, he does give you some potential scheme, and positional versatility in terms of the ability to play inside and outside. He's just not special, right? That's the only thing I would say. Like, at least from what I've seen. I haven't seen anything truly special about either him, what he does on tape or what he's brought physically to the table. And I didn't think he'd be some crazy freak athlete, right? That was not what I thought was in the cards for him anyway. So, moving on. Next, players that, once again, there are some players I think that have a chance to outperform. Now we're in the outperform your draft, where you were drafted area. Jordan Phillips, right? Yet another Jordan Phillips, hoping to avoid confusion, but Jordan Phillips is another big-time, was a big-time guy coming in. Started his career with the Volunteers, then eventually finds his way to the Terrapins. He did, once he got to Maryland, really sort of settle in. First year there, 28 tackles, with 1.5 of them being tackles for loss. And last year, in those games he started, 12 of them, he had 29 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. Had a good practice week at the East West Shrine game. 6'1" and 5'8", 312 pounds. That's enough size. He could play either 3 tech or on the nose. That sort of puts him in that middle spot. A 31.5 inch arms is okay. You'd like a little more length, but it's not terrible. 31 inch vertical, actually really good for a guy that size. 9 feet. That's right on the nose, what you're looking for, a guy that size. 29 bench reps. Once again, for the arm length, it's not super impressive, but still it's a solid number. Like, solid across the board. I think he is a solid, especially where you're getting him, solid player who will probably play on the interior spelling people. I don't know if he ever becomes a full-time player. Then we come to Ty Hamilton, right? Another player that some people had much higher than I had on their board. He did have a good, solid college career. He obviously got a chance to showcase himself during that run to the national championship. And 40 tackles combined, right? 2.5 of those were sacks and also forced a fumble. And he's another guy that either, you want to decide what he's going to be. 299, he probably is going to play in the 306 to 315 range. Probably going to, put on 15, 20 pounds, somewhere in there. 495 is a great number for a 299-pound testing athlete. 32 inch vertical, that's a good number. 9'3" broad, that's a good number. And here's the eye popper, right? The eye popper is the 35 reps. Now, 32.25 inch arms, that's almost exactly where it's slightly less actually than mine. I'm a little longer than that, but it's for a guy his height, it's probably right about average. But no matter what, 35 reps. And I think he goes to a good spot at pick 148 to the Rams. The Rams will get him on the field. And they don't care as much as other teams do about having their 3 techs be huge, as we've just seen. That brings us now to Yahya Black, who goes to the Steelers at pick 164. Super Steelerish pick. It's an Iowa player. They clearly, one of the Iowa players, one of 2 that they selected, they like guys from Iowa. Very large man, right? 336 pounds stretched over his 6'5" and 3/4 inch frame, 35 inch arm length, 5'3", 940. Even for a guy that size is not super great, but it's not terrible. Vertical 25.5. One more inch, you'd be like, yeah, that's pretty good. 25 and a half, meh. The 8'5 broad's actually not bad for a guy his size. Once again, inch or two, 8'8 you'd love, but 8'5's solid. At pick 164, a player who's going to definitely help you in the run game, short yardage, passing game, things like that. Hard not to like the pick. That brings us next to one of the Raiders' better picks, in my opinion. With pick 180, the Las Vegas Raiders bringing in J.J. Pegues, who I think ends up seeing the field early and often. While he might not be a full-time starter initially, I think he's going to be a guy that helps, especially in the run game, but he can do a little more. He's not just a run plucker. We'll be clear that he's not just that. Four-star recruit out of high school. Was a guy that had played tight end. Comes in as a freshman. Had 7 receptions for 57 yards. You love that about him, right? Shades of Warren Sapp. Also had 5 carries for 14 yards. Moves over to defensive tackle. And immediately, this is why he's still at Auburn. Immediately, takes to it like a duck to water. Though he was a part-time player initially on defense, 17 tackles, 2 tackles were lost, and then hits the transfer portal, comes to Ole Miss, back to sort of his hometown area. 26 tackles, 5 tackles were lost, 3 sacks, 2 pass deflections, and also caught a touchdown. Then the next year, 2023, with 12 starts, 42 tackles was a really good number. 8 tackles lost was a fantastic number. 3.5 sacks, another great number for a player who's truly an interior player. 4 pass deflections. And then last year, wins the Chucky Mullins Award. Just has, improves almost every year. That's what you look for, right? Now, only had 10 starts last year. Had a few minor, but, missed a few games with some minor stuff. 18 solo tackles, 23 assists for 41 total tackles. Now, considering he only started 10 games and appeared in 12, that's actually still a decent number. 3.5 sacks. So 10 career sacks. Once again, remember, redshirt's 1 year, is a tight end 1 year. So he only plays tackle for 3 years. He's averaging 3.333 repeating sacks per year, and he's truly an interior player. He's not a guy who's playing, moving around or whatever. He's playing on the interior. He could play on the nose, or he can play 3-tech. He's sort of in that area where he could do a little bit of both. He's 309 pounds, but he could carry 320 without it hurting him easily. 6'2.5", 32.5-inch arms, had 23 bench reps. It's a slightly lower number than I'd love from a guy that size. 5'15" in the 40, which is solid for a guy that size. And 27.5-inch vertical. I'd love another inch there. So my only sort of question is, can he get a little stronger? If he gets stronger, he could play 0 or 1. If not, then he probably ends up being a sort of less than scintillating 3-tech just because of the fact that he's not super explosive. Then we come to Tim Smith from Alabama. I won't say Smith underachieved. That would be an unfair thing to say. I will say that he didn't become quite the player that, everyone was maybe hoping to be. I mean, this is a 5-star recruit. This is a guy that people thought was going to come in and, blow it up. 6'4" and 3/8, 302 pounds. And, big hands, 10 and 3/8 hands, 33, for God's size, 33-inch arms, about right, about normal. 5'17", in the 45-1-7. That's okay for a 302-pounder. And then the 23-inch vertical scares me, right? He's 302. He's not 322. He's not 332. Not 340. 23-inch vert. The 8'2 broads, not terrible. I'd like to see another couple. 8'6", be a little more exciting. So, once again, it speaks to maybe some lower body, lack of explosion that you don't love. But once again, he's probably a rotational player. Picked at pick 190. You don't get too mad about it. Warren Brinson, another rotational player. You saw him when he was at Georgia. I think he continues to be sort of the same kind of player. And while you're getting, once again, another big body. This is a big group of D tackles. I keep saying it over and over again because it's true. 6'5" 1/4, 315, 33.5-inch arms, which is above average. 10 and 3/8-inch hands, which is very much above average. I like the 5'09" 40 from a guy that's that size. 31-inch vertical, that's good. Anything over 30 when you're 310 and up is really good. 9'7" broad from a 315-pound man, that's getting it. 27-inch bench reps from a guy with 33.5-inch arms, that's not bad. So I think that Brinson might eventually turn into a starter. But more than likely, he ends up being a really solid rotational player. Last season, he had 26 tackles, which is not a crazy number, but he wasn't a full-time player all the time. 6 tackles, lost 2 sacks. Not terrible, once again, for guys probably playing maybe just barely over 50% of the snaps. Now that brings us to another. I'm trying to have favorites, but this would be my number 2. If I did have favorites, it'd be my number 2. And that's Aeneas Peoples from Virginia Tech. Another undersized 3-tech. Now, once again, you should not go just willy-nilly comparing people to Aaron Charles Rodgers just because they're 282 pounds. But he's 6 feet and a half inches, 31 3/8-inch arms, and ran a 4.94 40, which because he's under 300 pounds, it's not as exciting, but it's still a good number. 32.5-inch vertical, that's solid. 9'1" broad, that's solid. 28 bench reps, that's above average. Not crazy, but above average. And first spotted him at Duke, right? I was actually looking at the defensive ends that they had at Duke at the time and noticed that they had this disruptive little 3-tech. And then things that I noticed about him, that's a guy that, really gives you so much effort, right? I love his effort. I love how much he just goes at it. His grandfather on his mother's side is Doug Wilkerson, right? A guy that made 3 All-Pros, a first ballot Hall of Very Good offensive lineman with the San Diego Chargers, who were in San Diego at the time, so no correcting me. But now that brings us to Jay Toyoa from UCLA, and there's 2 or 3 games on tape where you think, okay, this guy's got something. You would like to see more than 2 or 3 games on tape. Starts his career at USC, and then enters his name very quickly into the transfer portal. Don't know what happened, but very quickly he saw that wasn't the right place for him. Makes his way over to UCLA and has a really nice career. Briefly entered the transfer portal again, but goes back. This last season had 25 tackles, one of those at TFL, 1 sack. 6'2", right on the nose, 342. Can give you some push in the middle. 10-inch hands, 32.5-inch arms, 24.5-inch vertical, which, for a basically just sort of stocky, heavy person. Siaki Ika, D-tackle, is one of his brothers. Soyone Toa is another one of his brothers. He has a cousin named Stanley To'ofu who went to USC. And he has another brother who is a rugby player in New Zealand. So it's an athletic family, obviously. Classic run stuffer. And a younger guy, right? Still just 21, won't turn 22 for another few months. But mostly what he gives you is, like I said, stuff in the run. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Keontae Hamilton, next from Rutgers, goes to the Texans at pick 224. Things that you like about Mr. Hamilton. Well, another player who, at times, I don't know if he took over games, but he definitely had some games on tape where he was very impressive. And was a guy that was a wrestler, wrestled all through high school, wrestled very well, and then finds his way. In fact, he won a couple of championships while he was a wrestler in high school. Then for 1 year, did it also as a freshman in college. As a collegian, has had some, like I said, some good tape. His last year, he had 27 quarterback pressures, which was second on the team from the interior. That's a good number. In 2024, he had 4 sacks. That's a really good number from the interior. 36 tackles and 5 tackles for loss. He was an honorable mention all-conference player. Was not invited to the combine. So all the numbers I'm citing on him are pro day numbers. I wish he had been invited to the combine. But 6'3" and 3/8, 305, 32 1/8 arms. 5'03", right? Which is a good time for a man of size. 5'03" in the 40. 20-inch vertical. 29-inch vertical, solid. 9'2" broad, slightly above average for a man that size. And 29 bench reps. That arm length is probably right about what you're looking for. Not crazy. And then we come to Tame Akinsote, who is another player who is probably, once again, a rotational guy. Another guy who's got that frame where you could probably carry more weight. Comes in at 6'3 3/4, 306. Could probably put on another 12 to 18 pounds without losing anything. 5'9", 40 is not bad at all for a man his size. 29.5-inch vertical, solid. 8'7" broad, a little concerning. You'd like to see him over 9. But in his last season, started at Maryland, and in his last season there, had a really good year. Was leader amongst all the defensive linemen with 32 tackles, had 5 tackles for loss, also had 1 sack. And he's not truly a pass rusher, but he's a guy that I think in certain situations could be moved around, probably, between the 3 and the nose, maybe a little bit of 4-eye. There's some upside to him. And then the last, but far from least, is Zeke Biggers, Georgia Tech. A lot of people liked Mr. Biggers coming out of a lot of places, but he finds his way to Georgia Tech. While he's there, begins to make an impact from immediately hitting the field. Played a lot even as a freshman. In his last year, he had 23 tackles for loss. Sorry, 23. He would have gone way before this. 23 tackles, but of those 4 were tackles for loss. Also had a sack, 3 pass deflections, and a fumble recovery. Goes to the Shrine game, has a solid week of practice. And once again, you look at the frame. Another big body, 6'5 and a half, 321 pounds. And arm length, 34 and 7 inches arms. That is very, very long arms. 10 and a quarter inch hands, 5'14" in the 40. For a man that size is actually pretty decent. Here's the numbers where I got excited. The lower body pop numbers. 34 and a half inch vertical. For a 321 pound man, it's hard to explain until you see a man that size jump 34 and a half inches straight up from a standing start. That is crazy lower body power. 9'5" in the broad, which you'd expect. Strangely, only 22 reps. Now, he has long arms. But I thought he'd at least be in that 25, 26 range, but still not weak, but 22 is a little less than I expected. Just tells you he's more lower body powerful than upper body powerful. That is the D tackle class. It was my longest video to date. Well, it will be my longest video to date discussing this draft class. The one where I walked through the entire undrafted group may be almost this long. I'm not going to talk about every player who was an undrafted free agent, but the ones I think have a really good chance to stick. But once again, Bill Carroll for Zinni62 Media. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you again tomorrow with another group.